I paid $2,500 for my sister's baby shower, and she allowed her friend to publicly mock my difficult birth experience. Now everyone is demanding that I apologize. I found out I was pregnant after 5 years of unsuccessful attempts and a painful miscarriage 2 years ago that nearly broke me in ways I still don't fully understand. When the 2 lines appeared on the test that morning, my hands were trembling so badly I had to sit down on the cold bathroom floor, pressing my back against the cabinet just to steady my breath. I didn't cry at first. I was too afraid to believe it, too afraid that this could be real. That maybe, just maybe, my body was finally doing what I had begged it to do for years. Jason was still asleep when I crept back into the bedroom and slid under the covers beside him. I didn't wake him immediately. I just watched him breathe, that quiet rise and fall of someone who had stayed up late the night before rubbing my back while I dealt with another cycle, another letdown. When I finally told him, my voice barely a whisper, he didn't say anything at first either. He just pulled me into his arms and held me so tightly I could feel his heart pounding against my cheek. That was how we both knew it was real. We made the decision together to keep it a secret. After the years of comments, unsolicited advice, and well-meaning but painful questions from relatives, we wanted something that was only ours. A small, sacred hope, untouched by the weight of other people's expectations or pity. We didn't want congratulations or cautious optimism. We just wanted to feel the joy for ourselves, in our own quiet world, for as long as it would last. Almost at the same time, my younger sister Bonnie made her announcement, beaming, radiant, full of joy, as she stood in the middle of our parents' living room surrounded by balloons and streamers and the proud looks of every relative we had. She was 25, glowing in that effortless way that some people do, and she made the announcement with flair, raising a glass of sparkling juice and saying, "We're adding one more to the family." The room erupted with cheers and claps, tears and hugs, and the kind of celebration I used to dream about for myself. I sat beside her, smiling tightly, nodding as people passed by to congratulate her, watching her rub her stomach with the same hand she used to pour punch into everyone's glass. And in that whirlwind of pink and blue napkins, laughter and camera flashes, I held my secret close, hidden under my sweater and behind a soft smile that felt more like armor than expression. I kept touching my belly almost unconsciously, feeling the strange pull of 2 truths sitting side by side, my quiet miracle and her public joy. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was something softer and sadder. The kind of ache that comes from longing too long and knowing that even your joy now has to be protected like a fragile flame in a crowded room. So I stayed silent, not because I wasn't happy, but because I knew how quickly happiness can be taken away. A week later, Bonnie called me, her voice as cheerful and self-assured as always, but there was an edge to it this time, an assumption so sharp it almost cut through the phone line. She said she had been thinking about the baby shower and told me, without hesitation, that I had to plan it. Not that she would appreciate it, not that she hoped I could help, but that it was simply expected of me, her older sister, like some unspoken family duty I had been born into. I remember the exact words she used, said with a kind of entitlement that made my stomach twist. "You're the oldest, it's your job. Plus you're organized. And you don't have kids to worry about, so it'll be easier for you." I sat there, holding the phone in stunned silence, while she rattled off her vision: floral centerpieces, personalized favors, mocktails, a professional photographer, and not once did she pause to ask if I had the time, the money, or even the emotional capacity to host an event like that. She didn't know that I was also expecting. She didn't know I was still holding my breath through every ultrasound, every sleepless night. She didn't know that every penny I had was quietly being funneled toward prenatal vitamins, doctor's appointments, and the slow accumulation of hope. But even if she had known, I don't think it would have mattered. Because in that moment, all that mattered to her was the spectacle of celebration. And my only role in her eyes was to provide it. I agreed, even though every part of me felt uneasy, and Jason, ever steady and protective, told me plainly that it was unfair. But I brushed his concerns aside with a tired smile and the kind of practiced deflection you use when you've grown up being the one who holds things together. I told him it was just one event, just a few weeks of planning, just one more time to be the reliable older sister. Deep down, I think I was still hoping that doing this one thing would maybe build a bridge, even if it was made of paper. I poured myself into the planning like it was a job I couldn't afford to fail. I found a beautiful hall in the suburbs of Seattle with soft lighting and big windows that let in the spring sun. I selected a catering menu that was elegant but safe for all the dietary restrictions, hired a decorator who created soft pink and cream floral arrangements, and picked out personalized gifts for each guest: candles, handmade soaps, and tiny thank you cards. I ordered a 3-tiered cake, matching cupcakes, and even paid extra to have a local musician play soft background music during the brunch. Every detail was perfect. Every choice came from a place of care. And by the end, the total cost hovered just under $2,500. Jason didn't say, "I told you so." He just hugged me from behind one night while I was reviewing the guest list and whispered, "You don't have to keep setting yourself on fire to keep others warm." But I had already committed and the invitations were already sent. So I told myself it would all be worth it, even if it was only to see her smile, to maybe be seen. Even if no one knew the sacrifice it took. At the party itself, everything appeared to unfold just the way I had planned. Guests arrived in pastel outfits, the tables were laid out with care, the games brought laughter and squeals, and Bonnie opened her gifts with a practiced smile that matched the energy in the room. For a brief while, I allowed myself to believe it had all been worth it, that maybe this gesture, this effort would be seen for what it truly was. I stayed in the background mostly, refilling drinks, checking on the kitchen, smiling politely at compliments about the decor. But then Claudia, one of Bonnie's longtime friends, who had clearly had a few too many glasses of champagne despite the early hour, made her way over to me with the exaggerated grace of someone trying very hard to appear sober. She was smiling, too widely, and she leaned in with a kind of conspiratorial smirk as if she were about to share something lighthearted or funny. I smiled back, bracing myself, but nothing in me could have prepared for what came next. And right next to the table piled high with pastel-wrapped gifts and tissue paper still clinging to the edges, Claudia began to speak in that unervingly sweet tone that always carries something venomous underneath. With her champagne glass in one hand and the other gesturing far too dramatically, she loudly remarked how amazing it was that I went all out for Bonnie's baby shower, despite not having kids of my own. I stood frozen, a tight smile stuck on my face as she continued, her voice carrying easily over the hum of conversation now dwindling into silence. Then she said it, casually, almost like a punchline to some cruel inside joke, mentioning my miscarriage. She said something like, "I mean, after all you've been through, bless your heart for still showing up." And she smiled as if she had just offered me a compliment instead of twisting a knife. The room went quiet. Heads turned. I felt the blood drain from my face, my stomach flip with a nausea that had nothing to do with the pregnancy, and suddenly it felt like every light in that beautiful hall was too bright and every set of eyes was on me. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. All I could feel was that cold, hollow fear spreading through my chest. The same fear I had felt in the year 2 years ago, holding onto Jason's hand with trembling fingers, knowing what we were losing. But this time I was alone, surrounded by people who didn't say a word. I looked at Bonnie, hoping, desperately, instinctively, for some flicker of acknowledgement, for even a shadow of discomfort on her face, but she was just sitting there, casually flipping through her phone like nothing had happened. Her perfectly manicured thumb moved with slow indifference across the screen while the air around us stayed tense and still. I leaned in, my voice low and trembling, and asked if she was really going to let her friend say something like that. If she was really okay with Claudia turning my most painful experience into a joke in front of a room full of people. She didn't even look up. She just shrugged and said I was too sensitive, that Claudia was just telling the truth, as if truth ever gave anyone the right to be cruel. It was like being slapped without a hand, like the floor under me shifted slightly while everyone else stayed perfectly upright. In that moment, any illusion I had clung to, that maybe this gesture, this party, this sacrifice would mend something between us, shattered completely. I realized I could bake cakes, book halls, pour every ounce of care into showing up for her, and she would still look down at me unbothered the second it stopped serving her spotlight. I rushed to the bathroom, head down, trying not to let the tears fall until I was safely behind the locked door, away from the curious eyes and the suffocating silence that had followed Claudia's words like a dark cloud. Inside, I leaned against the cold tile wall, my hands shaking as I tried to breathe, to pull myself together, to find some version of strength in the middle of the storm unraveling inside me. My face in the mirror looked pale and stunned, like I had just woken up from something terrible and was still trying to understand whether it had been real. After 10 minutes, I dried my face, stood up straighter, and walked back into the hall. My steps were steady, but my heart was racing. I made my way across the room, past the pastel streamers and the laughter that had slowly resumed in my absence, and stood in front of Bonnie. She barely glanced up. I looked at her and, as calmly as I could, said I was done. I didn't explain, didn't ask for anything, didn't give her the satisfaction of watching me break again. I just took my purse from the chair where I had left it, turned around and walked out of the room, leaving behind the cake I had paid for, the decorations I had planned, and a sister who had no idea what she had just lost. An hour after I walked out of that hall, still shaking from the humiliation and betrayal, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. It was the catering company, polite but firm, reminding me that there was still an outstanding balance of $850 for the event. My chest tightened with anger, not at them, but at the fact that I was still being held responsible for something that had already broken me in more ways than one. I took a breath, held the phone tightly, and told them with quiet finality that Bonnie was now the organizer of that event and that they could direct all further questions and invoices to her. Before they could respond or ask anything else, I ended the call, blocked the number, and turned off my phone completely. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I allowed myself to sit in the silence of my boundaries without guilt. The next morning, I turned my phone back on and was immediately hit with a flood of notifications. Dozens of messages, each one more absurd than the last. My mother, never one to pause before picking a side, had written a long, scolding message demanding that I apologize to Bonnie for causing a scene and walking out, accusing me of being dramatic and selfish on what was supposed to be a joyful day for the family. Bonnie, unsurprisingly, had sent several messages dripping with passive aggression, claiming that I had ruined her day, that I had embarrassed her in front of her guests, and that it was incredibly unfair of me to make her pay for the remaining costs after everything she was already going through. But through all the texts, not one word, nothing, was said about Claudia's cruel remarks, about the deeply personal humiliation I had endured in front of everyone, about the silence Bonnie had offered while I was being emotionally gutted in the middle of a celebration I had planned and paid for. It was as if none of it had happened, as if my pain was a minor inconvenience compared to their need for everything to look perfect from the outside. A few days later, just as I was beginning to reclaim a sense of peace in the quiet of my home, Bonnie showed up unannounced, pounding on the door like the house owed her something. When I opened it, she stormed in without waiting to be invited, her face red with rage, her voice already rising as she launched into a tirade that made the walls shake. She screamed at me for abandoning her, demanded that I pay her back for the remaining catering costs, and accused me of ruining her baby shower deliberately just to be the center of attention. Somewhere in between the insults and the shouting, she spat out that I was always trying to be right, that I never understood the value of friendship, and that Claudia had just been teasing, as if turning my miscarriage into a punchline was some light-hearted joke I had blown out of proportion. She stood there, trembling, furious, almost wild, like a child denied a toy, and all I could do was stare at her and feel the last remnants of sisterhood fall away like dust. I told her to leave, calmly at first, but when she refused and kept yelling, I raised my voice and made it unmistakably clear that she was no longer welcome in my home. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her, and the silence that followed felt like the first deep breath I had taken in weeks. But it didn't last long. Later that evening, my phone lit up again with my mother's name. I let it ring, but then the messages started, each one more guilt-laced and manipulative than the last. She accused me of tearing the family apart, of being cold, of abandoning my sister in her time of need. That was the moment I understood with complete clarity that I had been cast in a role I no longer had any desire to play, the convenient daughter, the accommodating sister, the one who always swallowed her hurt to keep the peace. I opened my contacts, blocked them both, and sat back with a strange, unfamiliar calm. For the first time, I had chosen myself. A week later, after watching me spiral between silence and tremors every time I recalled that moment by the gift table, Jason decided he couldn't stay silent anymore. He found Claudia's contact through social media and sent her a direct but measured message, warning her that her public insults, especially targeting my miscarriage in a room full of people, could have legal consequences under defamation and emotional distress. Claudia responded later that evening with the kind of message that twists the knife while pretending to offer a bandage. A single line that read, "I'm sorry if you were offended," without an ounce of accountability or actual regret. There was no recognition of what she had done, no ownership, no sign that she understood or cared about the pain she had caused. It was just a formality, a hollow performance dressed as an apology, and it confirmed what I had already suspected. She had humiliated me on purpose, and now she was simply annoyed she had been called out for it. The silence I had hoped for never came. Instead, my phone became a portal for new waves of cruelty. Bonnie began posting cryptic captions and not-so-subtle passive-aggressive stories on social media, painting herself as the victim of a jealous, bitter sister who couldn't stand to see someone else happy. She called me hypocritical for walking out, hinted that I had always been competitive, and even made jokes about sisters who can't get their lives together. It didn't take long before the messages from extended family members started coming in. Some reached out quietly, expressing support and saying they had seen enough to know I had done nothing wrong. Others, emboldened by the public spectacle, sent me judgmental paragraphs about family unity and how forgiveness is more important than pride. It was like a line had been drawn through the middle of the family photo, and everyone had picked a side. And I, already raw from grief and betrayal, was left watching the fallout unfold on a screen, wondering how long it would take for the world to forget what I never would. Jason and I still haven't told them that I'm pregnant, and after everything that has happened, I have no intention of ever doing so. This child, our long-awaited miracle, deserves to grow up in a home filled with love, safety, and quiet joy, not in the middle of manipulation, cruelty, and emotional blackmail disguised as family loyalty. Every time I feel a flutter in my belly, I'm reminded that this little life inside me is the beginning of something new, something better. The silence from my mother and sister, once deafening, now feels like space. Room to breathe, to heal, to build a world that doesn't revolve around walking on eggshells. This break, as painful as it is no longer something I grieve. It's something I chose not out of spite but out of hope. Because this child will not inherit bitterness. They will inherit freedom.